You lived a Christian life. He attended church for years. He opened the Bible. He prayed, sometimes deeply, sometimes out of habit. Maybe you served in ministry, led a group, taught children, volunteered time and money. From the outside, his life had the form of a life given to God. And then the day came. Not the great white throne of Revelation 20, where the wicked rise for final judgment. A different court, exclusive. A court that most churches rarely mention and almost never explains in the depth that the text requires. The judgment seat of Christ, the Bema of Christ, as Paul called it in 2 Corinthians 5 verse 10. In this court, the question is not whether you were saved. This issue has already been resolved by the cross, by blood, by faith. The question this court poses is different, and it's a question that, when you truly understand it, changes the way you look at each day you have left. Were you faithful with what you received, what you did in the body, in that time interval between your birth and your death, according to what you did, whether good or evil? The words are Paul's. They are direct. No pastoral buffer, no softening preface. And they retain, in their layers of the original Greek, a depth that the translation into Portuguese cannot completely capture. Here is the question that opens this study, and that I need you to carry with you until the end. If the judgment seat of Christ is not about condemnation, if whoever appears before it is already saved, then why does Paul say that this courtroom was the principle that organized his entire life? Stay until the end. Because when you understand what the Bema really was in Paul's world, what the original text says about who attends, what will be revealed, and where Paul's motivation to live as he did came from, you will realize that this verse was not written to cause fear. It was written to free you from living for the wrong audience. And before you continue, if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, do so now. Because every study that comes out here has this depth, and you'll want to be notified when the next one arrives. To understand 2 Corinthians 5:4, 10, you need to understand where Paul was when he wrote these words. Not geographically, existentially. You need to understand the state this man was in when the pen touched the papyrus. The second letter to the Corinthians is, of all Pauline letters, the most personal, the most intimate, the most emotionally exposed. Paul wrote it around the year 55 or 56 AD, probably from somewhere in Macedonia, after a painful visit to Corinth that had ended in open conflict with part of the community. The previous letter, first to the Corinthians, had demanded difficult corrections, confronted serious divisions, condemned scandalous immorality, and reoriented distorted doctrines. The reception of this letter had been turbulent, to say the least. There was in Corinth a group that Paul ironically calls super-apostles, itinerant leaders who arrived in the city with impeccable letters of recommendation, with impressive eloquence, with an imposing physical presence. And they began to systematically undermine Paul's authority. They insinuated that he was weak in person, that his letters were harsh, but his physical presence was expressionless, that the fact that he worked with his own hands, rather than accepting financial support from the community, proved that his message was of less value than theirs. For some say, his letters are heavy and strong, but his presence in person is weak, and his word is contemptible. 2 Corinthians 10, it was an attack on credibility. And Paul responded, but not in the way you'd expect from someone under attack. He did not present credentials. He did not list apostolic achievements. It didn't enter into the awesomeness competition that the super-apostles clearly enjoyed playing. He revealed weakness, and within the weakness, he revealed something greater than any credential could show. In chapters 4 and 5 of 2 Corinthians, Paul develops one of the most profound theological arguments in his entire work. He talks about the glory that dwells in earthen vessels, about an incalculable treasure contained in fragile containers, so that the excellency of the power is of God and not of men. It talks about how external tribulation produces an incomparable eternal weight of glory. It talks about walking by faith and not by sight, about an invisible world that is more real than the visible one. And it is within this meditation on fragility, eternity, and the reality of the beyond that the text dwells, that it introduces the judgment seat of Christ. He does not introduce this court to threaten the Corinthians. He introduces it to explain where his motivation comes from. It's saying, in essence, I don't live to impress you. I don't live to impress the super apostles. I don't live for first-century historians to write well of me. I live being aware that there is a scheduled day, a day when all appearance will dissolve, a day when what will matter is not what it seemed to be, but what it was. And it is at this point that the text becomes more explosive than any controversy with Paul's critics ever could be. Because Paul is not just describing a future event, he is revealing the operating principle that drives all his sacrifices, the shipwreck crossings, the sleepless nights, the conflicts with communities he loved and who sometimes rejected him. The judgment seat of Christ, for Paul, was not an element of terror to be avoided. It was the horizon that gave meaning to everything else. You will understand this much more clearly when you understand what the Greek word Bema really means, and why Paul chose her. The Greek text of 2 Corinthians 5-10 opens with a statement that has no room for ambiguity. Pantes hemeis phanerothenai dei emprosten tou bematos tou Christo. It is necessary for all of us to be manifested before the Bema of Christ. The word translated as court in Portuguese is Bema. And before getting into the theological meaning, the historical meaning of this word opens a window that completely transforms the understanding of what Paul was describing. For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one may receive good and evil according to what he has done in the body. 2 Corinthians 5-10. The Bema was not a criminal trial court. This is the first and most important confusion that needs to be undone right away. In the Greco-Roman world of the first century, the Bema was a raised platform, a tribune, a seat of honor placed in a prominent location in city agoras, the public squares where civic life took place. It was on this platform that the ruler or magistrate sat to give audiences, proclaim decrees, or, in a way especially relevant to the context that Paul and the Corinthians knew very well, to distribute honors and prizes at the Isthmian Games. The Isthmian Games were the first-century equivalent of the modern Olympic Games, and Corinth was the center of these games. The Corinthians did not need a theoretical illustration of what a Bema was. They grew up watching that platform. They watched athletes climb onto it to receive laurel wreaths, public acclaim, recognition for years of rigorous training, and victory in the competition. Paul chose this word with deliberate precision, not for lack of alternatives. The Greek vocabulary had other words available to describe a court of condemnation: criterion, for a place of criminal trial; dikasterion, to a magistrate's court. He didn't use any of them. He used Bema, the platform of the victorious athlete, the award ceremony seating. The choice radically changes how you feel when reading this verse. The judgment seat of Christ is not a judgment of you going to heaven or hell. This issue was resolved by the cross, by faith, by regeneration. Whoever reaches the Bema is already saved. You are already in Christ. You have already crossed the only border that determines eternal destiny. The Bema is for believers, only for believers. And it's about what they did while they were believers. This leads to a tension that we need to handle carefully. If the Bema is not the court of condemnation, this confirms that works do not determine salvation. Paul is absolutely clear about this elsewhere. He is the apostle of justification by faith, not works. But this also means that his works have an eternal weight of another nature. A weight that does not determine whether you are in heaven, but determines with what glory you will be in heaven. A weight that does not decide your presence in eternity, but decides the depth of your position in it. There is a difference between being in heaven and being glorified in heaven. And 2 Corinthians 5:10 opens the door to this distinction with a theological precision that most preaching completely ignores. The Bema of Corinth was the place where athletes received what they deserved for their race. Paul is saying that every Christian life is a race, and every race has a finish. Not a finish to find out if you'll get into the stadium, but a finish where what you ran will be evaluated, weighed, and rewarded with the accuracy that only a perfectly fair judge can apply. But before we get to what will be judged, we need to understand precisely who will be before that court, because the answer will demolish some certainties that you may have carried for years. Paul uses the words all of us in 2 Corinthians 5:10. In Greek, pantes hemeus. And everyone in Greek is exactly what it seems to be. No exception, no qualification, no special category that allows you to get around it. Paul is including himself, the apostle, the church planter, the writer of half the New Testament. It includes the troubled Corinthians, the critical super-apostles, the leaders, the rank-and-file members, the Christians who have served faithfully for decades, the ones who have barely started. A parallel in Romans 14 illuminates this point with disturbing precision. Why then do you judge your brother? Why do you look down on your brother? For we will all appear before the judgment seat of God. For it is written, "As I live, says the Lord, every knee will bow before me, and every tongue will confess itself to God, so that each one of us will give an account of himself to God." Romans 114:10-12. Note the structure of the argument. Paul cites Isaiah 45:23, a text about God's universal sovereignty over every creature, to substantiate the reality of the court. And the practical conclusion he draws is that believers should stop judging each other. Why? Because there is a day when proper judgment will be given. Not for you, not by your pastor, not because of its denomination, by the only one who has the real authority to do so. But there is a detail that Romans 14 adds that transforms the understanding of what Bema means in everyday life. Each of us will give an account of ourselves to God, not about the neighbor's life, not from the leader who made a mistake, not from the spouse who did not serve faithfully. Everyone will account for themselves. This eliminates two deeply human temptations that contaminate the practical spirituality of many believers. The first is the temptation of comparison. To look at the Christian next door, identify their weaknesses and inconsistencies, and calculate that before God, you will appear reasonably well in relative terms. The judgment seat of Christ does not work with an approval curve. There is no relative note. There is no such thing as, "I passed because almost everyone was worse than me." Each person appears individually before the judge, with a specific inventory of their life, their gifts, their opportunities, and what they did with all of this. The second temptation that the text eliminates is the transfer of responsibility. My pastor taught me wrong. I grew up in a dysfunctional family that distorted my faith. My community never discipled me. These realities may be true, and God, in His perfect justice, will consider them with a wisdom that no human being has the capacity to exercise. But the text is unequivocal. Everyone will give an account for themselves. Bema's question doesn't start with what they did to you. It starts with what you did with what you received. There is a merciful severity to this reality. Severity because no one escapes. Merciful because no one will receive an evaluation based on criteria that are not theirs. You will not be judged by the opportunities of the Apostle Paul, nor by those of the missionary who served 40 years in Africa. You will be judged by your life, with your specific gifts, in your particular context, with your unique opportunities. But the most revealing aspect of this verse may not be the who. Maybe it's the how. Because the word Paul uses for attend hides a meaning that completely transforms the nature of this event. The word translated as attend in Portuguese comes from the Greek phanerothenai, and this word does not simply mean appearing in the sense of arriving at a place. It means to be made manifest, be completely revealed, be brought into full visibility. It is the same root used elsewhere in the New Testament to describe the revelation of Christ at the second coming. When the New Testament authors wanted to say that something hidden would be brought to light completely, irrevocably, and without the possibility of reduction or selection, they used phaneru, not a partial appearance, a full revelation. Think about what this entails in practice. Throughout life, most human motivations remain hidden, not just from other people, but sometimes even from the person themselves. The external act may have been right, while the internal motivation was impure. It is possible to serve in ministry out of pride, give offers by status, lead discipleship groups out of a need for control, pray in public with genuine words and a divided heart. The outward act appears pious. The inner reality will be much more complicated. At the judgment seat of Christ, the distinction between the outside and the inside disappears. Everything becomes manifest. The Greek word does not admit of any form of managed appearance, calibrated self-presentation, or strategic omission. What was, and what was will be completely visible before the judge. Therefore, do not judge anything before the time until the Lord comes, who will also illuminate what is hidden in darkness and will reveal the thoughts of the hearts. And then everyone will receive his praise from God. 1 Corinthians 4:5. Paul had described this principle to the Corinthians earlier, in this same previous letter. The Lord will illuminate what is hidden. He will manifest the intentions of the hearts. And then, note the sequence. Then each one will receive his praise from God. Revelation precedes reward. The complete manifestation is what makes fair assessment possible. You cannot adequately reward what has not been fully revealed. This should generate a specific quality of humility, not the performative humility that presents itself as modest in public, but feels internally superior. Not the humility that is a strategic leadership style, but the humility that comes from the awareness that one day all appearance will be removed, that the judge who will evaluate your works will not be deceived by any layer of intellectual justification, well-calibrated religious presentation, or self-narrative carefully constructed over decades. He will see what happened, full, no filter. And yet, and this contrast is one of the most striking in all of Pauline eschatology, this should not generate terror in the believer. Why? Because the judge before whom you will be fully manifest is the same one who died for you before you had done any of the works that will be evaluated. Full revelation will take place before someone who has already known you completely, in every impure motivation and in every hidden flaw, and yet chose Calvary. Bema is not the place where Christ discovers who you really are. It is the place where it is revealed to all creation what Christ has done in you and what you have chosen to do with what Christ has done in you. There is a radical difference between being revealed before a judge who knows you to punish and being revealed before a Redeemer who knows you to faithfully evaluate. The phanerothene of the judgment seat of Christ is the ultimate transparency of a life lived in grace, where grace does not eliminate responsibility, but makes it possible on a scale that simple religious performance could never achieve. But what exactly will be evaluated in this revelation? The text says, "What he did in the body, whether good or evil." This phrase opens one of the most profound discussions in Christian theology, and the answer will surprise you. The phrase that each one receives according to what he has done in the body contains a geographical specification that is theologically fundamental. In the body, not in the soul. In the body. In the period of time in which you inhabited this physical body, on this earth, in this material world. Why does this distinction matter with this precision? Because Paul is establishing that the judgment seat of Christ evaluates the actions carried out within the bodily life cycle, not a pre-corporeal existence, which in Pauline theology does not exist for human beings as it does for angels, not the immediate post-death existence, when the spirit is present with the Lord, but still awaits the resurrection of the body. The trial material is what was produced here, in this land, in this time, with this body. The immediate implication is urgent. The material of judgment is what you are producing now, not what you will produce at some future point when circumstances improve, not what you would have done if you had been born in a different situation. What are you doing today, tomorrow, in the next choice between serving and serving yourself, between obeying and giving in, between genuinely loving and just appearing to love? But the depth of the phrase intensifies when Paul adds either good or evil. In Greek, ite agathon, ite phaulon. And here is a point that many New Testament scholars have carefully noted. Paul does not use the customary word for moral evil in an active sense. The common word for active evil, ankakos, does not appear here. Paul uses phaulon, which means something closer to useless, vain, that has no real value, that does not produce permanent fruit. The court's question is not just, did you do good? The question is also, did what you did have real value? Or was it religious activity without spiritual substance? There is a category of works that is not active evil, that is not sin in the sense of deliberate transgression, but that in the face of divine judgment has no eternal weight. Works done out of wrong motivation, made in the strength of the ego with a spiritual appearance. Works that seemed to serve God, but served the self. Who filled a ministerial agenda but were not born of genuine love for Christ or for people. The most direct text on this aspect is not in 2 Corinthians. It's in 1 Corinthians. If I distribute all my goods to support the poor, and even if I hand over my body to be burned and have no love, I will not benefit from anything. 1 Corinthians 13:3. Distribute all your possessions to the poor. This is an objectively good act. Surrender your body to be burned. This is an act of extreme sacrifice that very few people will ever perform. Paul says that these acts, without love as a motivation, are useless. Not in the sense of salvation, which does not depend on them. In the sense of eternal weight, of the substance that persists beyond the fire of assessment. This completely redefines what it means to live a fruitful Christian life. It's not the amount of religious activity. It is not the visible size of the ministry. It is not the list of services provided that you can enumerate in front of other believers. It is the quality of motivation that sustained these actions. It is whether Christ was genuinely at the center or whether the center was you using Christ as a platform for spiritual self-realization. There is a brutal honesty in the judgment of the judgment seat of Christ that performative religiosity cannot support. You can mislead your community. You can fool your leader. You can be mistaken for decades about your own motivations, but the complete manifestation before the Bema does not admit any of these layers. What will be left standing that day will not be what you appeared to be. It will be what you really were before God in the moments that no one else saw. And it is exactly at this point that one of the most powerful images in all of Pauline theology comes into play. The image of a fire that tests and reveals what each work was really made of. The most direct parallel to 2 Corinthians 5:10 is in 1 Corinthians 3:10-15. And the image that Paul uses in this text is one of the most cinematographically powerful in the entire New Testament. Paul describes each believer as a builder. Christ is the foundation, the only possible foundation for a life that will survive judgment. And on this foundation, each believer builds throughout his entire life. But what he uses to build varies radically in quality. Gold, silver, precious stones, or wood, hay, straw. Now, no one can lay any other foundation than the one laid, which is Jesus Christ. And if anyone builds on this foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw, each one's work will be revealed, for the day will declare it, for it will be revealed by fire, and the fire will prove what each one's work is. 1 Corinthians 3:11-13. The day, with a capital letter in the reference, that first-century Jews would immediately recognize as an allusion to the day of the Lord. The day will prove. The fire will test. Note the material distinction carefully. Gold, silver, and precious stones are elements that fire does not destroy. You can put gold in a furnace, and what comes out the other side is pure gold, not ash. Fire removes impurities from gold. It does not eliminate it. Wood, hay, and straw are materials that fire completely eliminates in seconds. A pile of straw quickly turns to ash. There is no purified version of straw after the fire. There is only her absence. The works that withstand the fire of judgment are those built on the substance that divine fire cannot destroy. Genuine love, real faith, obedience that was born of devotion to Christ Himself. The works that fire eliminates are those that had the appearance of structure, but were flammable at the root. Made in the flesh, in human ambition, in fear of other people's opinion, in the desire for recognition that the human ego can never completely satisfy. And Paul adds a qualification that is both merciful and solemn. If anyone's work, which he built upon him, remains, he will receive reward. If anyone's work is burned, he will suffer loss, but he will be saved, however, as if by fire. 1 Corinthians 3:14-15. He will be saved. The foundation is Christ, and Christ upholds what is built upon him, but he will suffer loss. You will arrive in eternity with empty hands in the sense of rewards. No works that resisted the fire. No building that survived assessment. Safe, but like someone who escaped a fire without being able to save absolutely anything he had built. For many believers who have never measured their works by the yardstick of genuine motivation, this description is disorienting. But Paul places it before the Corinthians not to provoke hopelessness, to provoke awareness. To say, does what you are building now have the quality of material that survives fire, or of material that appears solid but will disappear in the first flame of divine evaluation? There is an aspect of this image that is rarely explored with due attention. The difference between gold and straw is not visible during construction. A covered straw wall can have the same external appearance as a gold wall. The only way to distinguish with absolute certainty what was inside is by fire, and the fire will only come on the day. This means that there is a level of honest uncertainty that every believer should maintain about the quality of their own works. Paul himself in 1 Corinthians 4, 3-3-4 says that not even his own clear conscience regarding his works is a guarantee that they are really what they appear to be. Only the Lord judges, and he will judge with an accuracy that transcends any human self-evaluation. The image of fire was not placed in the text to create insecurity about salvation. It was placed to create sobriety regarding the quality of the works. To remember that there is a huge difference between appearing pious and being pious. That God does not count the amount of religious activity. He proves the substance of what each activity carried within. If the court's fire will destroy some works and preserve others, the inevitable question is, which works survive? Is there a category of actions that the New Testament identifies as golden material? The answer is yes, and it is connected to something Paul calls crowns. The New Testament describes at least 5 crowns. The word used is always Stephanos, not diadem, the crown of royalty, but Stephanos, the athlete's crown of victory in the games. They are distinctions of honor in the kingdom of God, eternal records of specific faithfulness in specific areas of the Christian life. But before listing these crowns, there is a theological foundation that needs to be clearly established. These crowns do not create a caste hierarchy in heaven where some are more loved by God than others. God's love is perfect and equal for all who are in Christ. But Scripture is clear that there is diversity of glory, honor, and positions in eternity, and that this diversity corresponds to the choices made here, in the body, during the period of time that was life. The first crown is the crown of life. Blessed is the man who endures temptation, for when he is approved, he will receive the crown of life, which the Lord has promised to those who love him. James 1:12. The crown of life is associated with enduring temptations faithfully, not just passively resisting evil, but persevering in the love of Christ, even when the environment presses toward moral laxity or apostasy. John returns to this image in Revelation 2:10, where Christ promises that same crown to those who remain faithful until death. Faithful perseverance has eternal weight. The second is the crown of glory. Pasture the flock of God that is among you, taking care of it, not by force, but willingly. Not out of greed, but with a ready mind. Not as if you were lords of God's inheritance, but serving as an example to the flock. And when the Supreme Shepherd appears, you will receive the immortal crown of glory. Turn to 2-4. This crown is promised specifically to leaders who have shepherded with integrity, not out of obligation, not out of greed, but willingly and by example. Note the specificity. It is not enough to have occupied the position of leader. What determines the reward is the quality of motivation with which leadership was exercised. 2 pastors who have held the same position their entire lives can arrive at Bema under radically different conditions, depending on why they led. The third is the crown of justice. I fought the good fight. I finished the course. I kept the faith. This time the crown of righteousness is reserved for me, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who love his coming. 2 Timothy 4:7-8. Paul writes this in the last letter he probably wrote before he was executed in Rome. He's in prison, on the verge of death, and there is a serenity in those words that can only come from someone who is genuinely not performing for a human audience. There is no theater in that sentence. There is testimony. The crown of righteousness is for those who love his coming, for whom the second coming of Christ is an object of genuine desire, not of fear. The fourth is the incorruptible crown. And everyone who strives abstains from everything, and they do this to obtain a corruptible crown. But we and incorruptible. 1 Corinthians 9:25. Paul uses the athletic metaphor once again. The athlete who disciplines himself completely to win a laurel wreath that fades in days. The believer who disciplines himself spiritually is running for a crown that does not rot. Spiritual discipline, fasting, consistent prayer, deep study of the Word, mortification of passions, is not neurotic religious perfectionism. It is the training of those who are serious about the race having a real finish, with a real prize. The fifth is the crown of rejoicing, the crown of those who have led others to Christ. For what is our hope, joy, or crown of glory? Is it not yourselves before our Lord Jesus Christ at His coming? 1 Thessalonians 2:19. The people Paul brought to the knowledge of Christ, the converts of his preaching, are called the crown. The reward is not just personal. It is connected to the lives that have been reached by the faithful gospel. Every time you share the gospel with someone, every time you disciple someone to maturity in Christ, every time you faithfully witness and that person comes to the Lord, you are adding to the weight of your crowns. It's building with gold. Notice the pattern that emerges when you place these 5 crowns side by side. They cover perseverance in temptation, faithfulness in pastoring, love for the coming of Christ, personal discipline, and evangelism. These are not categories of extraordinary spiritual superheroes. They are the fundamental dimensions of the ordinary Christian life lived with consistent faithfulness, and each of them is within the reach of any believer who chooses to take seriously what grace has made possible. The crowns of the New Testament reveal that God is incredibly specific in what He values and rewards. There is no divine vagueness about what has eternal weight. He identified precise categories of faithfulness. And first-century believers who read these letters understood that these promises were not literary decoration. They were spiritual contracts signed by God Himself regarding the destiny of His works. All these crowns, all this theology of rewards, all this exposition of the court, none of this would have real force if it remained only on the intellectual plane. The real power of this teaching only appears when you understand what it did to Paul's concrete life. And what he did is radically different from what most imagine. Reread the immediate context of 2 Corinthians 5:10, because there is a sequence of thought that Paul develops in the previous verses. And this sequence reveals what is perhaps the most subversive aspect of this entire theology. In verses 6 through 9, Paul makes an extraordinary statement. He is willing to leave the body and go to be with the Lord. He is not distressed by the possibility of death. You are not holding on to faith as an anchor of fear. He is genuinely desirous of the presence of the Lord. And then he adds, whether present or absent from the body, we try to be pleasing to it. The word pleasant in Greek is euarestos, literally well-pleasing, that which completely satisfies, that which is received with genuine approval. And the motivation Paul describes for seeking this approval is not fear of judgment, it's love. For the love of Christ constrains us, for we have come to this conclusion. One died for all, therefore all died. And He died for all, so that those who live should no longer live for themselves, but for Him who died for them and rose again. 2 Corinthians 5:14-15. The love of Christ constrains us. In Greek, syneke literally compresses us, holds us together, moves us from the inside out. Paul does not live oriented towards the judgment seat of Christ because he is afraid of evaluation. He lives this way because the love that Christ demonstrated on the cross has created in him an internal urgency that can no longer function in the mode of self-preservation. Love changes the direction of the self. Genuine love makes it impossible to live only for yourself once you understand the weight of what has been done for you. And this is where the connection between the court and love is made in a way that most judgment preaching never achieves. The judgment seat of Christ is not a threat mechanism. It is the horizon that gives final meaning to love. When you genuinely love someone, you care about what your response to that person's love will reveal. You want what you offered in return for what was given to be genuine, faithful, without subterfuge. Not because you're afraid of being punished if you don't go, but because love creates in you the desire to have been faithful to the love you received. Paul loved Christ with an intensity that no persecution could erase, no shipwreck could weaken, no community rejection could bend. And in the face of that love, the judgment seat of Christ was not a threat. It was the promise that your faithfulness would be recognized by the only one worth impressing. This perspective radically changes the way you should understand Christian motivation. The question is not, should I serve out of fear of judgment? The question is my love for Christ real enough to motivate genuine loyalty? Or do I still need fear as a substitute for love that has not yet matured? John articulates this progression precisely in his first letter. Perfect love casts out fear. The younger believer in the faith may need the court's warning as a motivator. There's nothing wrong with that. The believer who has matured in love finds that the horizon of the court transforms, not from threat to irrelevance, but from threat to promise. The promise that love was not wasted, that fidelity has eternal weight, that every moment you chose Christ when the cost was real was recorded in a dimension that time cannot erase. Paul lived as he did not because he was afraid of the court, but because he had love deep enough to care what that court would reveal. The difference between the two is the difference between a life lived under pressure and a life lived in the freedom of faithful love. Both produce similar actions on the outside. Inside, they are completely different worlds, and the Bema will distinguish one from the other with absolute perfection. And now we come to the deepest point of everything Paul built into this text, the revelation he saves for the end, the perspective that transforms not just how he thinks about the judgment, but how he thinks about every moment he lives before the judgment. There is a shift in perspective in 2 Corinthians 4 and 5 that is the heart of everything Paul is communicating, and it needs to be read in its natural sequence to be completely understood. For our light and momentary tribulation produces for us an eternal and incomparable weight of glory. We look not at the things that are seen, but at the things that are not seen. For the things that are seen are temporal, and the things that are not seen are eternal. 2 Corinthians 4, 17, 18. Light and momentary tribulation. Paul was thus describing the experience of being stoned almost to death in Lystra, flogged in Philippi, wrecked 3 times, spent a night and a day on the high seas, chased from city to city, experienced cold, hunger, nakedness, and constant dangers that he himself catalogs in 2 Corinthians 11. Any outside observer would look at this inventory of suffering and use exactly the opposite words: heavy and permanent. How did Paul arrive at the word light? By comparison. He compared the weight of present suffering with the weight of future glory. And when that comparison is made with theological precision, when you weigh the tribulation of a human life, which is at most a few decades long, against the eternal weight of a glory that has no end, present suffering, however real, becomes comparatively light. The scale changes, the perspective changes, and when perspective changes, behavior changes. This is what the judgment seat of Christ does to understanding the present time. It redefines the present. Every moment in the present is not just what it appears to be. a moment within a sequence of moments that will end in death. Every moment of the present is building material. It's gold or straw. It is something that will survive the fire of judgment, or something that the fire will eliminate. When you live with this awareness, not as an anxious obsession, but as a fundamental guidance, the gravity of everyday decisions changes completely. The question, should I be honest in this situation, even if it costs me, gains a dimension that transcends the immediate consequences. Yes, honesty can be costly now, but what is built by honesty is golden material that survives the fire of the court. And what is built by dishonesty, even if it produces immediate gains, even if no human being ever discovers it, is straw. So we do not fear death. Rather, we prefer to be absent from the body and present with the Lord. Therefore, whether present or absent, we strive to be pleasing to Him. 2 Corinthians 5:4-5:8-9. The deepest spiritual revelation of 2 Corinthians 5 is not the description of the judgment seat. It is the posture of heart that Paul describes in response to the existence of the court. A stance that is not anxiety about judgment, but orientation toward the approval of the beloved. A stance that doesn't ask, how do I escape the court, but how do I make sure that what the court reveals is something that honors Christ. This is the God that Paul knew, a God who does not use judgment to terrorize those he loves, but who uses the horizon of judgment to give eternal weight to what, without that horizon, would seem like just small, everyday decisions with no lasting consequence. The judgment seat of Christ is proof that God took every moment of your life seriously, that no allegiance was invisible, that no work of genuine love has been lost to the oblivion of time, that no difficult choice made in obedience when no one was looking went unrecorded. The Bema is the horizon where God's eternity leans into the time of each believer and confirms what you did here mattered. Every detail, every moment, every choice that cost something real. The theology of the judgment seat of Christ in 2 Corinthians 5:10 is not an isolated island in the New Testament. It resonates with at least 4 parallels that broaden and deepen it in ways that need to be explored for the picture to be complete. The first parallel is the parable of the talents in Matthew 25:14-30. In this parable, a master distributes talents, significant sums of money, to his servants, each according to his ability, and sets off on a journey. When he returns, he calls them to account. 2 multiplied what they received. They received identical approval. Well, good and faithful servant, you have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. One buried the talent he received out of fear. He received condemnation, not for what he actively did wrong, but for the negligence of what he failed to do. Well, good and faithful servant, you have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Matthew 25:21. The parable clearly establishes that the gifts and opportunities of each believer are variable. Not everyone was given the same, but the evaluation criterion is constant: proportional fidelity to what was given. The servant who received 5 and gained 5 more is praised with the same words as the servant who received 2 and gained 2 more. No one was evaluated by comparison with another. Each was evaluated on fidelity to its specific opportunity. The second parallel is the parable of the mines in Luke 19:11-27, a variant with a different theological emphasis. Here, everyone receives the same initial value. The difference in outcome is not the gift, but what each person did with the identical gift they received. He who multiplies 10 receives authority over 10 cities. He who multiplies 5 receives authority over 5 cities. He who did nothing loses even what he had. Together, these 2 parables build a sophisticated picture of the Bema. The evaluation considers both the fidelity proportional to what was given and the result generated by what was invested. It's not just the inner effort that counts. The external fruit has weight. The multiplication of what has been entrusted has eternal weight. The third parallel is in John 5:22-23, where Christ states that the Father entrusted all judgment to the Son. This means that the Bema of 2 Corinthians 5:10 is not presided over by an anonymous or bureaucratic judge. It is presided over by the same Christ who said, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden." The same one who washed the disciples' feet on the night he was going to be betrayed. The same one who said on the cross, "Father, forgive them, because they do not know what they are doing." His assessment of each believer's works will be the fairest assessment any human being has ever received, made by someone who knows the weight of every temptation, who knows the limitations of every context, and who at the same time demands the faithfulness that grace has made possible. The fourth parallel is Revelation 4:10-11, where the 24 elders, interpreted by many studies as representing the church glorified in the presence of God, do something extraordinary with the crowns they received. The 24 elders fell down before him who sat on the throne and worshipped him who lives forever and ever, and they cast their crowns before the throne. Revelation 4:10. They cast the crowns before the throne. If the crowns represent rewards from the court, this act reveals that the final response of the glorified believer to the rewards received is not self-celebration. It is worship. Crowns are not trophies for personal display in eternity. They are returned to the God who made every work that survived the fire possible. This parallel completely transforms the motivation to produce works of gold. It is not accumulating personal glory. It's not about getting to heaven better positioned than others. It is having something of real weight to offer to the only one who is worthy of all glory, and the joy of having lived in such a way that this offering is possible. You've come this far, and that says something about you. You're not here out of superficial curiosity. Something in this text touched something that you need to face, so I need to be completely direct with you right now. Not the time you've already spent. That was. Not the time you will have after death. That doesn't go into the Bema. The material that is being added to the inventory of your judgment is what you do now, today, with the life you still have. Every morning you wake up is a building session. You are choosing gold or straw. Every conversation, every use of your time, every moment you decide between what serves Christ and what serves self, the judgment. Seat of Christ does not evaluate unfulfilled intentions, evaluates works, and works happen in the body, in time, in the real world in which you are living. Two people can do exactly the same outward action, serving in the same area of ministry, preaching the same gospel, giving the same offering, and be building with radically different materials. What passes through the fire and what turns to ashes is not determined by the exterior of the work. It is determined by the inner substance that supported it. This requires an honesty that most people avoid. Stop asking just what I'm doing for God and start asking why I'm doing it. Whether the honest answer includes pride, need for human recognition, fear of others' opinions, or self-preservation more than genuine love for Christ, the material has already been identified. A God who didn't evaluate what you do with the life He gave you would be a God who didn't take your existence seriously. The fact that there is a judgment seat for believers is not a contradiction to God's love. It is confirmation that He treats each Christian life as something with real weight, with eternal significance, with consequences that transcend time. You matter to God seriously enough that what you do with the time you have been given matters too. And the question this study leaves for you, not someone else, not your leader, not your spouse, for you, when was the last time you made a life decision with what the judgment seat of Christ will reveal before your eyes, and not just what the people around you will think? Therefore, my beloved brother, be firm, immobile, always abounding in the work of the Lord, because you know that in the Lord your work is not in vain. 1 Corinthians 15:58. We return to the starting point, a Christian life. He attended church. It served, prayed. And on the day he appeared before the Bema of Christ, he discovered what he had really built. But now you know it's not a horror scene. It is a scene of revelation. The full revelation of what really happened between a soul and its Savior during the interval of time that was life. The revelation of gold and straw, of the crowns won and the prizes that the fire took, of the loyalty that genuine love produced when the cost was real and no one was watching. Paul did not write 2 Corinthians 5:10 for you to live in anxiety about judgment. He wrote for you to live with the awareness that each day that passes in the body is producing something of real weight that goes beyond death, beyond time, to a horizon where Christ Himself will evaluate what your life has been. This is not a burden. It's the greatest privilege of existence, confirmation that you're not just passing through time. You are building something that lasts. In the next video, we will go into one of the most misinterpreted texts in all of Christian eschatology, the precise distinction between the judgment seat of Christ and the great white throne of Revelation 20. These are two completely different judgments for completely different categories of people, with completely different consequences. And the confusion between the two has cost the practical theology of millions of believers dearly. If this study added something real to your understanding of the Word, leave a like. It helps other people find this content. And it's a gesture that takes 2 seconds, but has weight up front. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe and activate the bell. Every study published here has this depth, and you'll want to be notified when the next one arrives. And one thing before you close the video, write in the comments what impacted you most about this study. Was it the discovery of what the word Bema really meant in Paul's world? Was it the distinction between gold and straw in the fire image of 1 Corinthians 3? Was it the connection between Christ's love and Paul's motivation? Tell me what happened. Because whoever comments here is telling me which direction to delve into in the next studies. And this channel exists for that. I fought the good fight. I finished my career. I kept the faith. Paul wrote this on the verge of death, with the precision of someone who knew the court was close and was not afraid of what would be revealed. May this be the testimony of every life that has gone through this study today.